The moment the K9 lunged forward, everyone in the courtroom froze. But what it attacked wasn't who you'd expect. There was no barking, no warning, just silence. And then, chaos. 1 second, the prosecutor's finger was pointed at the woman in the witness stand, a young black veteran named Lieutenant Camille Hayes. The next, the officer's K9 German Shepherd broke protocol. It leapt but not toward Camille. No. It landed on its handler, Officer Brandon Cutter. Gasps erupted. The judge slammed her gavel, shouting for order, but no one could move. No one understood. The K9 didn't bite. It didn't growl. It just stood over him, rigid eyes locked, blocking his every step like it knew something the rest didn't. And Camille, she didn't flinch. She didn't speak. Her eyes simply dropped to the dog end. In that moment, a ghost of something unspoken flickered in her expression. Recognition. No one in the courtroom could comprehend it yet, but the dog wasn't. Attacking it was testifying. In silence, that moment was the crack in the dam. And soon, everything would unravel. But to understand how the truth clawed its way into the light, you have to go back. Because this wasn't just a courtroom drama. This was war. A war between power and silence. Between the uniform and the woman who wore hers with shame. Between a loyal K9 and the officer who used him to bury someone alive 3 weeks earlier. Camille Hayes never thought she'd set foot in a courtroom again. Not after Afghanistan. Not after what happened to Bravo Unit. But now, she sat shackled, branded a liar, a thief, and worse. Charged with assaulting a police officer, resisting arrest, obstruction, fabricated charges layered like bricks, each one meticulously placed by Officer Cutter. And at the heart of every lie was his K9, the same K9 that once saved Camille's life on foreign soil. That's what made this personal, that dog valor wasn't just a tool of the justice system, here was a soldier. And Camille remembered everything. The explosion, the screaming, the silence afterward, shattered only by a low whine, not from a man but from that dog, trapped under rubble, but still alive, still breathing, still protecting. And somehow, by a cruel twist of fate, that same dog now stood at the side of the man who betrayed her. Officer Cutter had rewritten history. He wasn't just a white cop with a badge. He was a war hero with a spotless record. Man who claimed Camille had attacked him during a routine stop, that she'd reached for his weapon, that she was aggressive, unstable, unfit. Words that stick to black women like glue in courtrooms. But Cutter forgot something. Valor hadn't. And while everyone saw a quiet dog trained to obey, Camille saw something else. A witness. Because dogs remember. They remember fear. They remember pain. They remember betrayal. And Valor had seen more than the court would ever allow to be spoken. The loop, the biggest lie, wasn't what Cutter said on the stand. It was why he said it. Because Camille was no ordinary black woman in uniform. She was once his commanding officer. And Valor, it had been hers first. That dog's loyalty wasn't to Cutter. It never had been. So when the dog lunged in court, jaws clenched but teeth sheathed, it wasn't violence, that it was defiance. It was truth trying to break through iron chains of power. And silence. And now, the courtroom would be forced to listen. But what no one realized, not even Camille, was that Valor had been trying to communicate long before he jumped out. His disobedience, his refusal to follow Cutter's cues, his subtle shifts in gaze whenever Camille entered the room, the way he stood between them, even in shackles. This wasn't instinct, it was memory, and buried inside that memory was a secret. Neither Cutter nor Camille had told something that went back to their final mission, something that involved missing files, 2 dead men, and 1 soldier who was never supposed to return. And that soldier wasn't Camille. As Valor stood firm, Cutter tried to shove the dog aside, snarling under his breath, "Control your damn mutt." But Valor didn't move. Instead, he stared up at Camille and whimpered. Soft, barely audible, but in that whimper was a name, a call sign, one only Camille would recognize. Her voice caught in her throat as the sound hit her. Bravo 4 gasps again. Cutter froze. The jury leaned in. Camille stood. "Your Honor," she said, trembling but resolute, "I have reason to believe this K9 was assigned to me during classified military operations, and I request immediate access to military records proving that." The judge blinked. And in the back corner, someone in uniform stood up. "I can confirm that," said the man. Cutter's face strained of color, because that man wasn't just some officer. He was from Naval Intelligence, and he was holding a sealed file marked "Top Secret." White officer frames black woman until her K9 German testifies silently. Camille Hayes never wanted to be seen. Not like this. Not through the distorted lens of courtroom cameras or judgmental stares behind polished desks. Not as a defendant. Not as the angry black woman. Not as the dangerous one. She had spent her whole life becoming invisible in all the right ways, quietly excelling, blending in, earning stripes in a world that wasn't built for women like her. A world that saluted her uniform but never looked her in the eye. But they had no idea what it cost her. She earned her Navy SEAL stripes after 2 deployments, 3 concussions, and 1 bullet that still lived near her spine. She led Bravo Unit with tactical precision and emotional grit until the day everything went dark in Helmand Province. That's where it all began, and where something inside her broke. They'd been tracking insurgent movement near the outskirts of a farming village, a detour, an ambush, and then silence, smoke, screaming. Her unit was pinned, and in the middle of that nightmare was a German Shepherd, codename Valor. He wasn't part of their squad originally. He was meant for another team, reassigned last minute when a handler was killed by an IED. Camille didn't even know his full training record. But that dog didn't hesitate. He pushed through collapsing beams, dragging one of her men by the flak jacket. He stayed by her side when gunfire chewed through metal. He didn't flinch when her blood stained his fur. They saved each other that day. But Valor didn't come home with her. Cutter did. Brandon Cutter White, sharp-jawed, loud in ways Camille never was. He'd been injured during the same mission. Shrapnel to the leg, but he spun a different story when they landed stateside. Story where he led the rescue. Where Camille panicked under pressure. Where she froze. It was a lie so bold. It worked. Her record went under review. Her security clearance was revoked. Her exit was quiet, no ceremony, no closure. They said honorable discharge, but Camille knew better. They were burying her. And the worst part, Valor had vanished into military custody. Reassigned. The dog who saved her life. Gone for years, she tried to move on. Civilian life. Therapy that never dug deep enough. Nights filled with silence so loud it echoed. Until 3 weeks ago, a routine traffic stop turned nightmare. She hadn't even been speeding. She saw the badge before she saw the man officer. Cutter, same smug grin, same cold eyes. Only now, he had Valor by his side. He acted like he didn't recognize her, but Camille saw the flicker, the twitch of guilt, the briefest shadow that passed across his face, and that was all she needed to know. This wasn't about a broken TAILLIGHT, that it was about erasure. He needed her gone again, so he made her dangerous, said she resisted, that she attacked, that his dog had to restrain her. Another report, another lie, and again the world listened to him. She thought about staying quiet, letting it happen. After all, what could one woman say to a system built to silence her? But then she saw Valor and he looked at her like he remembered everything. The explosions, the blood, the silence. He looked at her like no one else ever had, not with pity but with recognition. That's when Camille knew she wasn't alone in this. That dog was more than a weapon. He was a witness, and Cutter had no idea what kind of truth Valor carried in his silence, because memory doesn't fade with rank, and loyalty doesn't change with uniforms, and sometimes justice comes on 4 legs. White officer frames black woman until her canine German testifies silently. The courtroom buzzed with whispered tension. The prosecution wore smug confidence like a well-pressed suit. Officer Brandon Cutter sat rigid in his chair, every muscle taut with false righteousness. Across the aisle, Camille Hayes sat calm but not still. Her fingers twitched slightly in her lap, her jaw clenched against the storm inside. Her defense attorney had done his best, but this wasn't just about law, it was about perception. Cutter had built the perfect illusion, decorated officer with a clean record, attacked by an aggressive black woman during a traffic stop. His police body cam conveniently malfunctioned. Witnesses were unavailable, and the canine on duty, his supposed backup, couldn't speak, or so they thought. Camille hadn't even planned to fight back. Not at first. She had no money, no network, and a reputation the media was too eager to smear. But there was one thing she hadn't expected. A volunteer legal intern named Jacob Finch, who had grown up with a father in the canine unit, when he saw Cutter's report and recognized the dog's ID number, something clicked. This canine used to serve with the Navy, military trained. His name was Valor. That was all Camille needed to hear. The court allowed the canine to appear on the second day of testimony. Cutter insisted it was routine. The dog's presence helps him feel secure. But Camille knew better. Valor walked in slowly, his gait steady but cautious. Years had aged him, silver now threading through the tan fur along his spine. But his eyes, those sharp, intelligent eyes, hadn't changed. And when they landed on Camille, he froze. The entire courtroom fell silent as Valor's head tilted, ears rising ever so slightly. Then he stepped toward her, just one step. The leash went taut. Cutter yanked it back, hard. "Control your animal," the judge snapped. But Camille hadn't moved. Neither had Valor. Their eyes were locked like ghosts, recognizing each other in a crowd of strangers. It was Jacob who whispered the plan next morning. "There's a behavior test, a way to see if the dog recognizes someone. If the judge allows it, it could crack Cutter's entire case." It was a long shot, but Camille had nothing else. They filed the motion. The court hesitated, but Cutter had played his hand too confidently. He agreed, probably believing Valor would obey him. Like always, the test was simple. A neutral handler would hold Valor on a loose leash. Camille would enter the room. They'd observe the reaction. That was the plan. But what happened? No one expected. The moment Camille entered the courtroom for the demonstration, Valor's ears perked again. His body tensed, but not with aggression, with anticipation. Then he whimpered, soft, barely audible, the kind of sound dogs make in dreams or memory. The handler took a step back. Valor's tail gave the tiniest wag. "Proceed," the judge instructed. Camille knelt halfway across the room, said nothing. She just looked at him. eyes steady, soul exposed. And Vala moved. Slowly, purposefully, he crossed the space between them and placed his head in her lap. The courtroom gasped. Cutter stood up, shouting, "He's been trained to respond to hand signals. She's tricking him." But the handler, clearly shaken, replied, "There were no signals. The dog made that decision." That was when Camille whispered it low and firm, "Sit, Vala." He obeyed instantly. The judge narrowed her eyes. That single act of obedience to Camille, not Cutter, shook the foundation of everything the prosecution had built. But the real twist was yet to come. Jacob had requested Vala's military records under the Freedom of Information Act. It took days, but it came through. Cutter's name wasn't listed anywhere. As Vala's handler during the Helmand rescue, Camille's was. She was the one listed as the dog's partner. She was the one recommended for Vala. Cutter, merely mentioned as a support officer in the final evac. The report had been buried, rewritten, redacted, but now, exposed, the defense moved quickly. Jacob called for a recess, then brought in a surprise witness, a retired SEAL medic named Ortiz, flown in at the last second. Ortiz confirmed it all. Camille was the hero. Cutter was the coward who froze under fire. And Vala, he had never left Camille's side until they took him away without warning after discharge. It wasn't just a lie, it was a theft. Cutter lost control. He lunged across the courtroom, shouting that they were lying, that Camille had manipulated the dog, that this was a setup. The judge ordered security to restrain him, and in that chaos, Vala growled, low, protective. He stepped between Camille and Cutter, not as a weapon but as a guardian, and the message was loud and clear without a single word spoken. "This is who I choose." For the first time in months, Camille stood up, as the accused, not as the forgotten soldier, but as a woman reclaiming her truth. The courtroom, once a battlefield of whispers and sighs, now echoed with an unfamiliar hum. Respect. Reporters had started circling the story like sharks sensing a shift in tide. The judge ordered an evidentiary review. Cutter had been removed from the courtroom. His outburst replayed on every local news station. Camille left the courthouse that evening with Vala by her side. No leash, no uniform, just trust. He walked beside her like he'd been waiting all his life for this reunion. Cameras flashed. Voices called her name. Some even asked for interviews. Jacob offered to shield her from the media, but Camille didn't flinch. "I want them to see me now," she said quietly, her voice anchored by pain and pride. That night, Jacob arranged a quiet hotel where she and Vala could rest in peace. He had some paperwork to file, more motions, more hearings to prepare for, but the case, he believed, had turned a corner. Camille let Vala climb onto the bed beside her. He curled near her feet, just like he used to during deployment. She stroked the fur behind his ears, tears slipping down her cheeks without invitation. "I thought they broke you," she whispered. "I thought they erased me." He didn't move, but his eyes never left hers. The next morning, Camille woke to knocking. She opened the door and found Jacob's face pale, his voice shaky. "It's gone." "What's gone?" "The footage. From the courthouse. The clip showing Vala walking to you during the test. It's been wiped from the official system." She blinked. "No, back up." He shook his head. "Only local media captured parts, but not the whole test, not the key moment." And Cutter's team just filed a new motion. They're claiming the demonstration was staged, that Vala's behavior was emotionally suggestive, not admissible. Camille's stomach dropped, but the handler testified. They're saying he was coerced, that he's under investigation now. Internal affairs. She felt the air get thick around her. Double quotes, ... So we're back at zero. Jacob hesitated. Not zero, but close. Cutter's lawyers are demanding the testimony be thrown out, and they're filing charges against me for tampering with sealed military records. If they win that motion, we can't use your military bond with Vala as evidence. The walls spun around her just yesterday. The truth had begun to breathe, and now it was suffocating again. Later that day, she walked Vala in silence. The courthouse was no longer friendly. People stared again, not with sympathy, but curiosity, as if wondering, was it all just a show? She couldn't blame them. The system had trained people well. A black woman accused by a white officer, it didn't take much to sway opinion. She sat on a park bench, Vala resting beside her. A child walked by, hesitated, then ran over to pet him. "Hi, doggy," the boy said cheerfully. "What's his name?" "Vala." "Cool name." The boy smiled at her, then ran back to his mom. Camille looked down at the dog who had once taken a bullet to protect her, who had waited silent for years until the day he saw her again. "They're trying to erase you," she murmured. Vala lifted his head. "And if they erase you, they erase me, too." But Vala didn't blink. He just nudged her hand, like he was saying, "We've been through worse." Camille didn't remember walking back to the hotel, only that it was dark by the time she closed the door behind her and sank to the floor. No calls, no noise, just Vala, quietly resting near the window. Everything inside her was quiet too, but not the good kind of quiet. The kind that felt like ... defeat. She had done everything right. She served, she protected, she bled for her country. She watched friends die, buried memories she still couldn't talk about. And when she came back home, She didn't expect a parade, she just wanted peace, but peace was for others. Camille had been cuffed, framed, dragged in court, while people whispered her name like a scandal, and now even Vala's silent testimony, last thread of hope, was being erased. Buried again by the same system that decided she was guilty long before a trial began. She stood up slowly, pacing the room like a caged soul. How do you fight a war where the enemy wears a badge, where they smile in courtrooms and lie under oath, and no one dares question them? How do you win when truth isn't enough? Jacob had left a message. We'll keep fighting. But even his voice sounded thinner than before. There is a kind of loneliness that only warriors feel. The kind where you survive the battlefield, only to come home and find yourself hunted by the very people you swore to protect. She looked at Vala. Even now, in his age, in his silence, he stayed alert, loyal. She remembered the explosion in Kandahar, the one that nearly ended both their lives. She had pulled him from the debris, his leg broken, fur soaked in blood. They said he wouldn't make it. She carried him anyway. He lived. But when she got discharged and he disappeared from her unit, she thought maybe he'd been euthanized. Another casualty no one would speak about until he walked into that courtroom. Now they were both back on the battlefield. Only this time the enemy didn't use guns. They used lies, paperwork, smiles, and press conferences, while quietly burning your name behind closed doors. Camille sat on the bed and pressed her palms into her face. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was how her story would end. Not with a bang, not with some heroic redemption, but with silence. Like the silence they tried to force on Vala. Like the silence they expected from every black woman too tired to keep shouting. But then, she felt something press against her leg. Vala sitting watching her with those deep amber eyes. She couldn't explain what it was, only that, in his gaze, she felt something shift. Not pity, not sadness, but defiance, like he was telling her, they tried to break me too, but I remembered you, I waited. Now don't you dare give up. Camille exhaled. She rose slowly, walked to the mirror, and looked at herself, eyes tired, heart wrecked, but not broken. They could silence evidence, tamper files, erase video, but they couldn't erase what was living and breathing and standing right beside her. They couldn't erase him, and they damn sure couldn't erase her. The next morning, Camille didn't dress like someone who had given up. She wore her old Navy SEAL badge tucked into her inside coat pocket, not as proof for others, but as a reminder for herself. She'd survived too much, lost too many, to walk away now. Vala walked beside her, steady and silent. His gait was still stiff from the old wound, yet there was pride in the way he moved, as if he too understood. This wasn't just about Camille anymore. This was war, but this time it would end on their terms. Camille stepped into Jacob's office like a storm ready to break. I need every file you can get on Officer Briggs. Everything, past cases, canine transfers, misconduct reports. Jacob looked up from a stack of legal documents, startled by the fire in her voice. Camille, what changed? She dropped a worn-out flash drive onto the table. This. Jacob inserted it into his laptop and stared at the grainy footage. His eyes widened. It wasn't court-approved video. It was security cam footage from a nearby storefront and marked and untouched. It showed the traffic stop. Only this time, the audio played. Officer Briggs' voice was clear. Too clear. Turn that camera off. Why? Camille's voice replied, because I said so. Double quotes, static. Then a muffled thump, followed by the unmistakable sound of a trunk being opened. Then Briggs whispering, nobody will believe you anyway. Jacob stood frozen. This wasn't submitted to evidence. Camille's eyes were ice because it was buried. But the shop owner gave me a copy. Said someone came in weeks ago asking to delete it. He didn't. Said something told him to keep it your dog, he said. The way he stared at me like he needed me to remember something. Jacob leaned back, stunned. You mean Vala led you to this? Camille didn't answer. But deep down, she knew. It wasn't coincidence. It never had been. Jacob moved fast after that, filed a motion for emergency revaluation of evidence, called in favors, pulled strings. By noon, a judge granted an emergency hearing behind closed doors. Inside that courtroom, Camille sat at the witness bench again, but this time, something was different. Briggs was there too, seated beside his lawyer, face red and jaw tight. Vala sat beside Camille, calm and still. The judge looked toward the defense. Mr. Jacobson, you claim to have newly discovered exculpatory evidence. Present it. Jacob stood. Yes, Your Honor. This footage, undisclosed, directly contradicts Officer Briggs' sworn testimony. He played the clip. The courtroom held its breath. The thump. The order to turn off the camera. The voice. Nobody will believe you anyway. Then came a voice from behind the prosecutor. That voice doesn't prove anything. It could be anyone. Camille didn't even flinch. She leaned into the mic, then compared it to his recorded testimony. A beat. That judge nodded slowly. Let's do it. They played the court's previous recording of Officer Briggs' testimony. Same voice, same cadence, and then a third clip, one no one expected. From Vala's own canine body cam. Jacob explained. Military working dogs were often issued harness cams during active duty. Most were destroyed after retirement, but Vala's was removed and archived. We retrieved this from military logs, declassified under urgent request. They played the feed. The angle was shaky, black and white, but unmistakable. It showed the aftermath of the traffic stop. The trunk open, Briggs rummaging through Camille's bag, placing a suspicious object inside a bag of marked currency. Not found until later. Not listed in the first police report. Briggs' lawyer stood up in panic. This footage is inadmissible. It lacks certification, but the judge raised a hand. Enough. He looked at Briggs, then Camille. What do you have to say for yourself, officer? Briggs stammered. She's a threat. I saw her file. Special ops. I thought she was dangerous. Silence. Then Camille stood up, slow and deliberate. You thought I was dangerous because I'm a black woman who served more than you ever did, who bled for a flag you wear like a costume. And you couldn't stand that I didn't flinch when you pulled me over. She turned to the judge. He planted evidence, lied under oath, and he almost got away with it until Vala remembered. He never forgot. Not the war, not the people who hurt him, not me. It was enough. The judge declared a recess, pending full review and likely dismissal of all charges, but Camille didn't wait for applause. She walked out of that courtroom without a single word. Outside, reporters swarmed, cameras, flashes, microphones, shoved in her face. But Camille ignored them all until someone asked, Miss Johnson, how did you prove your innocence? She looked down at Vala. I just listened to the one voice they couldn't silence. She turned and walked away. Vala trotted beside her. Then for the first time in weeks, maybe years, her chest felt lighter. Like maybe, just maybe, the war was finally over. Camille thought it was over, but that illusion shattered. Just 2 nights later, at 3:12 a.m., she was asleep in her small apartment. Vala curled at the foot of the bed when a strange sound woke her. Not a bark, not a knock, a mechanical click like metal sliding against metal. She froze. Then Vala was appears erect, eyes narrowed, not growling, not barking, just focused. Alert. Camille moved quietly toward her front door. It was slightly ajar. She hadn't left it that way. She slowly reached for the gun she hadn't touched in years. Tucked in a drawer she promised herself she'd never open again. Her pulse roared in her ears. She stepped out into the hallway. Nothing, just the hum of the refrigerator. The silence of 3 a.m. Then Valère turned, stared toward the living room. Camille followed his gaze and saw it, a small package, sitting dead center on the rug, wrapped neatly in brown paper. No name, no address. She knelt slowly and opened it. Inside was a photograph of her standing outside the courtroom 2 days ago. The photo was taken from a distance like a sniper's lens. On the back, in messy block letters, it said, You exposed one of us, but how many others are you willing to lose? Her breath caught. Vala stepped in front of her, placing himself between her and the window. His stance was different this time. It wasn't alertness, it was readiness. Camille slowly stood up, her entire body tense because the war wasn't over. It had just gone underground. And as the city slept peacefully around her, Camille realized the courtroom was just the beginning. Vala hadn't protected her from the past. He was preparing her for the war that still lay ahead. Camille stared at the photo in her trembling hands, the scrawl on the back burning into her memory. You exposed one of us, but how many others are you willing to lose? She didn't sleep the rest of that night. She didn't cry either. Instead, she sat beside Vala on the couch, her hand resting gently on his back. The weight of everything they'd survived sat between them, wordless, heavy, but shared. Vala leaned his massive head against her thigh, as if to say, You're not alone. Camille had once thought silence was weakness, but now, it was everything. Silence was how Vala had spoken in court. Silence was how the truth had finally screamed loudest. And now, silence was the signal that they weren't safe. In the days that followed, Camille didn't disappear. She didn't hide. Instead, she showed up at city hearings, at precinct reviews, at training academies where new cadets were taught more about commands than conscience. With Vala beside her, she became a face the department couldn't ignore. Not because she wanted fame, but because no one else had ever dared show up with scars still fresh, and a dog who once served the same. The badge that betrayed her. She wasn't trying to be a hero. She was just trying not to let the system swallow another woman like her, another Ashley, another Camille. Vala changed too. He no longer looked for orders. He no longer wore the rigid posture of obedience. He walked beside her, not behind. He scanned crowds with intuition now, not training. When children approached to pet him, he didn't flinch. He leaned in, soft eyes, slow breath, almost like he knew they were the future he was trying to protect. And when he saw a uniform approach, Camille, he'd stand a little taller, still calm, watchful, not aggressive, just ready. The lawsuit settled. Quietly, it wasn't in the headlines. The department offered a number Camille didn't want. She countered with a condition instead. You won't silence me, or him. They didn't fight her. They knew too many people had already seen the footage of Vala standing between Camille and the man who once gave his orders, and too many people had felt something when that dog didn't growl or bark or bite. Just looked at the judge, then back at Camille. then sat beside her, like the truth was so obvious it didn't need words. 1 year later, she stood at the graduation ceremony of the next academy class, not in uniform, not as an officer, but as a survivor, a speaker, a witness. She talked about bias, about truth, about justice that doesn't come from a badge but from the courage to stand alone. But she didn't mention her name in court, or the false report, or the officer who nearly destroyed her. Instead, she ended with just one sentence. Sometimes, the loudest truth comes from silence. And right on Kuvela walked to her side. No leash, no handler, just her partner. And the room stood in applause. The final visit. Camille stood alone at Ashley's grave that spring. The grass was greener now. The birds chirped softly in the distance. Vala stood a few feet behind, giving her space. Camille knelt, brushing leaves off the stone. "I never told you this," she whispered, "but I almost gave up." Her voice cracked, but he didn't. She looked back at Vala, who met her eyes with the same calm, ancient wisdom he always had. "He never let me forget who I am, and because of him, they finally saw who you were." A tear slid down her cheek. "I hope that's enough." She stood slowly, turned to leave, and Vala followed. But before they reached the car, he paused, turned his head and barked. Once, soft, deep, intentional. Camille looked back at the grave, and for a moment it felt like Ashley was there smiling. Not every wound heals clean, not every battle ends with victory, and not every truth is spoken out loud, but sometimes, a silent K9, a woman the world tried to break, and a courtroom full of people who expected nothing. They come together, and something shifts. Not everything, but enough. Enough to keep going, enough to believe again, enough to raise your voice or your hand, say, "This time, we're not backing down."